7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
Portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls are here at DC's Museum of the Bible, removing all obscurity and open for all to see.
One accidental discovery, one hidden cave, and a secret buried for over 2,000 years. In 1947, a simple shepherd threw a stone into a dark cave near the Dead Sea and heard something crack. What he found inside would shock the entire world. Ancient scrolls, fragile, mysterious, and now, for the first time ever, scientists have sequenced their DNA. But what they uncovered wasn't just history. It was something no one expected. The results didn't just confirm theories, they completely changed them. Where did these scrolls really come from? Who created them? And why do their secrets still matter today? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see history forever. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because the truth is often stranger than fiction. And we're just getting started. The hidden discovery. The Dead Sea lies between Jordan and Israel. It's one of the saltiest bodies of water on Earth, so extreme that no fish or plants can survive in it. That's why it's called the Dead Sea. But while the water holds no life, the land surrounding it tells a very different story. It holds history, ancient history, preserved for thousands of years. The region is filled with dry hills and rocky caves. The climate is harsh, hot, arid, with almost no rainfall. And that dryness is exactly what made this place so important. It preserved the past. That's why one of the greatest discoveries in human history happened here. Back in 1947, that same shepherd approached one of these caves. He threw a stone inside and heard something break. Curious, he climbed in. What he found were ancient clay jars, very old jars. And when he opened them, he saw leather scrolls wrapped in linen cloth. At that moment, he didn't realize what he was holding, but the world soon would. Those scrolls became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known biblical manuscripts ever discovered. Some of them dated back more than 2,000 years, and the discovery didn't stop with just one cave. Between 1947 and 1956, scrolls were uncovered in 11 different caves near a site called Qumran. Each new find added more fragments, more texts, and more pieces of history waiting to be understood. When scholars began studying them, they found a wide range of writings. Some were early copies of biblical books, others were prayers, hymns, and community rules. Some explained religious beliefs. Others revealed how people lived, what they followed, and how they practiced their laws. These texts came from a critical period, between 250 BCE and 68 CE, a time when early Judaism was evolving, a time just before the rise of Christianity. These scrolls weren't just ancient documents. They were a window into the past. They showed how people thought, how they worshipped, and how they understood the world around them. And there was something else that made them extraordinary: the way they survived. Stored inside sealed clay jars, protected by the dry desert air, they were shielded from decay. Heat and a lack of moisture preserved them for over 2,000 years. But time still left its mark. After decades of handling and study, the scrolls became fragile. Some broke into tiny fragments. Others faded so badly that they were barely readable. Even then, one thing was clear. This discovery changed everything. It reshaped how we understand ancient religion. It transformed the study of sacred texts. It rewrote history itself. But one question remained. Where did these scrolls truly come from? And how did all these fragments connect? Fragments without answers. The real challenge didn't begin with finding the scrolls. It began after. When the jars were opened, many of the scrolls were already broken. Time had shattered them into thousands of pieces. Some fragments were large, most were incredibly small. Some contained only a few words. In total, around 25,000 fragments were discovered, belonging to roughly 1,000 different manuscripts. Imagine trying to solve thousands of puzzles at once, without knowing which pieces belong to which puzzle. That was the reality. The fragments looked almost identical, same material, same color, same age. There were no page numbers, no titles, no clear order. So researchers turned to details. They compared handwriting styles, they analyzed the shapes of letters, they studied the texture, thickness, and color of the parchment. They examined words and sentence patterns, searching for connections. But this process was anything but simple. It was slow, and it was risky. If scholars matched the wrong fragments together, they could accidentally create a false text, and that mistake could spread into books, research, even history itself. It could reshape how people understand religion and ancient life. The stakes were enormous, but there were no better tools, so they kept going. Over time, one dominant theory began to take hold. Most experts believed the scrolls belonged to a group known as the Essenes. Ancient historians like Josephus and Pliny the Elder had written about them. They described a quiet, isolated community living near Qumran. According to this theory, the Essenes copied and preserved religious texts. At first, it made sense. Some scrolls outlined strict community rules. Others reflected beliefs similar to what was known about the Essenes. Some even followed a different calendar, suggesting a distinct group. But cracks in the theory began to appear. Some fragments showed completely different writing styles. Some parchments were made with higher quality materials than others. Some scrolls seemed older than the Qumran settlement itself. And one question kept growing louder. If all these scrolls came from a single group, why were there so many different versions of the same texts? Why would one community preserve ideas they didn't fully agree with? Why was there so much variation? These questions didn't disappear. They only grew stronger. But without solid proof, scholars couldn't abandon the Essene theory. It remained the best explanation they had. Still, something didn't fit. Something was missing. And no one knew how to solve it, until one simple question changed everything. What if the answer wasn't in the writing, but in the material itself? Before we go further, subscribe, because this is where the mystery takes a completely unexpected turn. The DNA idea. In 2012, something unusual happened. It didn't begin in a lab. It didn't begin with advanced technology. It started with a conversation. A molecular biologist named Oded Rechavi sat down with a biblical scholar named Noam Mizrahi at Tel Aviv University. They began discussing the Dead Sea Scrolls and the challenges scholars had faced for decades. Mizrahi explained the difficulty of matching thousands of fragments, how researchers relied on handwriting, material clues, and educated guesses, and how those methods often left critical questions unanswered. Rechavi listened, but he was thinking differently. He came from genetics, from the world of DNA. And then he asked a simple question. What are the scrolls made of? Mizrahi answered immediately. Parchment, animal skin. That answer changed everything. Rechavi paused. Then he said something no one had considered before. If it's animal skin, then it must still contain DNA. It was a simple idea, but it was revolutionary. For the first time, researchers could look beyond the text and study the material itself. They could analyze the parchment and uncover biological evidence hidden inside it. This moment connected two completely different worlds, one focused on history, language, and religion, the other on genes, cells, and biology. Together, they created a new path forward. Scientists had already used ancient DNA to study human migration and animal evolution. Now they saw an opportunity to apply the same methods to ancient manuscripts. But the challenges were enormous. Could DNA survive for over 2,000 years inside parchment? Could it be extracted without damaging the scrolls? And how could they separate ancient DNA from modern contamination after decades of human handling? It seemed almost impossible. The Dead Sea Scrolls weren't just artifacts. They were sacred, carefully protected. No one was allowed to cut or damage them in any way. But the idea refused to fade. Because if it worked, it could answer questions that had remained unsolved for 70 years. It could reveal which animals were used to create the parchment. It could show whether different fragments came from the same source. It could trace where the materials came from and how the scrolls moved across regions. Slowly, the idea gained momentum, and Rechavi and Mizrahi began working together. They brought in more experts. One of them was Penina Shaw from the Israel Antiquities Authority, someone who had worked closely with the scrolls and understood just how fragile they were. The team knew one thing for certain. They could not use traditional scientific methods. These were not ordinary artifacts. They were sacred. Every decision had to balance discovery with preservation, knowledge with responsibility. So instead of forcing a solution, they began searching for a new one. Something careful, something precise, something that had never been done before. The goal was clear, but the path forward wasn't. So how do you extract DNA from ancient, fragile scrolls without damaging them at all, solving the impossible? At first, the challenge seemed unsolvable. Scientists needed DNA, but they couldn't risk harming the scrolls in any way. Even the smallest damage would be unacceptable. So they started thinking differently. They studied how the scrolls were stored, they examined the containers holding the fragments, and over time, they noticed something unusual. Tiny particles had collected inside those containers. Dust. Not ordinary dust, but microscopic fragments that had naturally fallen off the parchment over time. That dust changed everything. The team realized they didn't need to touch the scrolls themselves. They could study the dust instead. Inside it, they found collagen, a protein found in animal skin. That meant DNA could still be present. Carefully, they began collecting these particles from areas with no writing, edges, already damaged sections, places where no information would be lost. It was slow, it was delicate, but it worked. Then came another problem. The DNA wasn't clean. The parchment-making process had already damaged it. Ancient craftsmen had soaked, stretched, and scraped the skins. Ink chemicals added further stress. Over centuries, heat, dryness, and minerals inside the caves caused even more degradation. And then there was contamination. For decades, people had handled the scrolls. Every touch could leave behind modern DNA. So how could scientists separate ancient DNA from everything added later? To solve this, they created ultra-controlled lab environments. Every surface was cleaned repeatedly. Ultraviolet light was used to destroy stray DNA. Airflow was tightly controlled to prevent contamination. They also used advanced genetic techniques. They focused on mitochondrial DNA because it survives longer and exists in multiple copies inside each cell, making it easier to detect. When possible, they also studied nuclear DNA. which provides deeper biological details. And they didn't just test once, they repeated experiments. They cross-checked results across different labs. They looked for patterns that only ancient DNA could produce. It required patience, precision, and constant verification. But slowly, something began to emerge. Patterns, connections, clarity. After decades of uncertainty, scientists were finally seeing the scrolls in a completely new way. And when they looked closely at the results, they realized something shocking. Before we reveal it, subscribe, because what the DNA uncovered changes everything we thought we knew about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So what did the evidence actually reveal about their true origin? What the DNA uncovered changed everything. When the test results finally came in, researchers realized they were looking at something completely unexpected. The DNA didn't just fill in small gaps, it delivered clear, undeniable answers. Patterns began to emerge that no one had ever noticed before. For the first time, scholars could move beyond the written words and examine the true origins of the material itself. At first, the findings seemed straightforward. Most of the scroll fragments were made from sheepskin, which made perfect sense. Sheep could easily survive in the dry conditions around the Dead Sea. But then something surprising appeared. A number of fragments were made from cow skin, and that changed the entire picture. Cattle cannot survive in the harsh desert environment near Qumran. They need water, open land, and vegetation to graze, resources the Dead Sea region simply doesn't provide. That meant one thing: those cowhide scrolls had to come from somewhere else. Suddenly, it was clear that these scrolls did not all originate in one place. Researchers pushed even further. They began comparing DNA across different fragments, searching for genetic connections. When two pieces came from the same animal, the match was unmistakable. This allowed scholars to group fragments together with a level of accuracy that had never been possible before. What once relied on guesswork was now backed by solid evidence. One of the most important breakthroughs involved the Book of Jeremiah. There were two distinct versions, one longer and closely aligned with the Hebrew Bible we know today, and another shorter version arranged differently. For years, experts debated their origins. Were they variations of the same tradition, or something entirely separate? DNA finally gave the answer. The shorter version was written on cow skin. The longer version came from sheepskin. This wasn't just a minor variation, it proved these texts came from entirely different sources. They represented separate traditions, preserved by different groups. That realization carried enormous significance. It revealed that multiple communities were maintaining their own versions of the same sacred texts. Scientists also discovered relationships between the animals themselves. Some parchments came from closely related animals, suggesting certain scrolls were produced in the same place and time. But others showed no connection at all. The bigger picture became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a single, unified collection. It was diverse. It showed movement. It reflected a network of communities sharing and preserving knowledge across regions. Everything scholars thought they knew began to unravel. For decades, the dominant belief was the Essene theory, the idea that a single isolated group living at Qumran created and stored all the scrolls. It was taught in universities, displayed in museums, and used as the foundation for years of research. But the DNA revealed a very different story. Instead of pointing to a single origin, the evidence showed that the scrolls came from multiple sources and communities. Different materials, different traditions, and different beliefs all came together over time. Suddenly, the variations in the texts made sense. Rather than being mistakes, they reflected the rich diversity of ancient Jewish thought. The findings also support the idea that many of the caves served as sacred storage places, where precious writings were hidden and preserved instead of being destroyed. In the end, DNA didn't just answer one question. It changed how scholars understand the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were not the work of one isolated group, but a remarkable collection shaped by generations of people. Perhaps the greatest discovery wasn't hidden in the scrolls themselves. It was hidden in the tiny traces of DNA that revealed their extraordinary journey through history. So what do you think about this discovery? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video fascinating, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time, because we've got many more incredible stories coming your way. Until next time, see you soon.